Thanks so much, everyone, for watching. We've got an epic lineup tonight of speakers. We've got an awesome panel here. Amazing group of functional doctors, technology, activists for a leap forward in medicine.
You know, our goal is to make it easy for practitioners to learn in community.
This ecosystem that is being set up by the meetup groups, we believe will be the future ecosystem of this evolved primary care network, and it all revolves around you.
Welcome to the Functional Forum. Thanks for joining us in the charge to accelerate the evolution of medicine. Please welcome your host, James Maskell.
Hello, everyone. Hello, and welcome to the Functional Forum. It's the first Functional Forum of 2023. Wow, it's a long time we've been doing this. 9 years, actually. It was 2014 when we had the first Functional Forum. Super grateful to be here. And we've got an incredible show to kick off our year of connection. Last year was the year of growth, and we looked at all the different ways in which growth was playing a role in healthcare and the growth of the evolution of medicine. And now we see that connection is critical. We're super excited to have here today a couple of incredible speakers who have, until this moment, never met. And I think it's gonna lead to some very interesting conversations later. Why don't I just introduce them here now? So first, we have, for the first time ever on the Functional Forum, Dr. Nathan Price. Dr. Price is a PhD. He has been part of the Institute for Systems Biology, which is one of the most sort of foremost academic areas looking at systems biology. He was one of the founders of Aravale, which was one of the first sort of commercializations of precision medicine. He's now the chief science officer of Thorne Health Tech. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about connection as it relates to systems biology, network medicine. And then most of the Functional Forum community will be very familiar with Dr. Jeffrey Geller, who is one of the leaders in the group visit movement, has been doing group medicine for more than 20 years and has pioneered his empowerment model and was one of the heroes of my second book, The Community Cure. So just for context and to get us up and running here, we're kicking off the year of connection. This is a live show, so feel free to tweet us with hashtag Functional Forum. If you can do it live, and I'll be following the tweets in real time. We'll have some time for Q&A later. And welcome to all the communities of practitioners across the country who are watching. We have all different groups that are meeting regularly. If you go to functionalforum.com, you can see the upcoming groups. I'll be visiting my own group tomorrow in just outside of Sacramento in Folsom, California. I'm excited to see all of the practitioners there. And thank you to all of the sponsors for their ongoing support of the evolution of medicine. This, we're kicking off tonight the quarter one focus. We're going to be looking at heart health. We're going to be looking at all areas of connection in heart health. Interesting time for heart health as well. It's in the news. It's everywhere. So I'm excited to bring some of the leaders in heart health. We've got Dr. Mimi Guarneri. We've got Mike Twyman, who's been on before. He's a cardiologist coming up very soon. So look out for the next couple of functional forums. We're going to be on that topic. So welcome, Dr. Price and Dr. Geller. Great to have you here. And let's jump into it. So, obviously both of you, I think, resonate with probably different words in the kind of healthcare that you're in, Nathan. I know like P4 medicine, precision medicine. Jeff, you've been obviously running integrated medicine for the underserved for a long time and been a critical part of that. Obviously, the show is the Functional Forum, but ultimately, what are we talking about? We're talking about a new way of treating chronic illness that gets to the root cause, that puts lifestyle first and focuses on connection at every level. And I guess where I want to start with both of you is, the core connection that I think that every physician who's watching this or any practitioner who is watching this, they reject fundamentally the idea that you could deliver medicine without a connection to the patient. And that's sort of first and foremost. So why don't we just start there? And maybe Jeff, as a way to kick that off, the relationship that you see as the relationship between patient and doctor is sacred and is one of the foundations of medicine, and yet we sort of lost our way a little bit as we sort of moved into hyper commercialized medicine. So what is your take on the importance of the reconnection of patient to doctor?
Yeah, being connected is so essential. Knowing that someone cares about you when they're giving you advice, trusting someone, that one-on-one relationship you can have with your physician is priceless. And what I work towards is group medical visits, is creating a bigger relationship with a whole community of people you trust who can all support one another. When I started, most of my group visits started as treatment for loneliness. And when you're, so 29, 30 years ago, there was very little evidence that loneliness is bad for you. It's just kind of like obvious, right? Loneliness is bad for you. And so I did some research. Just the other day, I was watching PBS News. Being lonely is the equivalent of smoking 16 cigarettes a day, according to some Yale professor who was being interviewed on the show. Nathan's nodding his head. And I know the main thing you can do for public health is to get people to quit smoking. And so getting people to feel connected. My life work going forward is working on this thing called a group inclusion effect to find out really how you make people feel included in a group. But we'll have plenty of time to talk about this. It's just really important that people know you care and that you have a connection.
Absolutely. Nathan, I know, in all the different endeavors that you've done and now working with Thorn Health Tech that works with a range of physicians and different groups, one of the things that is sort of always needed to facilitate this kind of medicine is time for that connection. So what's your the connection between doctor and patient, in the time that you've been involved in clinical medicine? What's your take on that?
Yeah. Like everyone here, I think it's an incredibly important relationship, and the emotional aspects really are important. Like, I focus primarily on science, as everyone knows, but it is true. Like, the loneliness statistic was really striking when it first came out, right? The number one predictor of whether you're going to achieve longevity, social connection, right? Do you feel meaning and purpose with people that you love? And those elements are incredibly important. It even top smoking and obesity, and a lot of big ones that have major effects logically. So if we're thinking about that doctor-patient relationship, it is one of the things that I think is going to be really interesting, especially as we start entering into this new world of with AI and so forth. And I'm kind of obsessed with ChatGPT right now, like all the world. And what's really interesting is the degree to which we can leverage some of these new technologies and new insights to get rid of a lot of routine or busyness kind of aspects, which actually can elevate. There's really a world in which medicine becomes more human or it becomes less human. And we're going to be at that fulcrum of deciding what that looks like a lot in the next few years, faster than I think any of us really thought.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. Well, let's jump in. I think maybe we'll start with the more heady stuff because people have they can really get their head around it. Nathan, I mean, when I've seen you lecture at PLMI and other events, we're getting into some pretty complex science. And I guess I just want to start with, I mean, the functional medicine movement is built on this concept that we have to see chronic disease through the lens of systems biology. And I know that Jeff Bland has been, influenced by you and Lee Hood through the years to really understand that. And I guess, maybe you could just sort of lay out for us as clearly as you see from your perspective, why this disconnected paradigm of health, where you see, if it's a gut issue, then be in the gut, and if it's a brain issue, then be in the brain. Why that paradigm sort of has to die if we want to get our head around chronic disease.
Yeah, it's a great question, James. And it is an amazing thing. I remember when I first started learning biology as an undergraduate and walking around campus. And just as you start learning about the complexity of biology, I just felt like any moment I was just going to fall down and die. I'm like, I can't believe this thing actually stays working and functioning with as much as is going on as you learn about it. And there are many examples that teach us how deeply interconnected this is. I'll give an example. You mentioned gut and you mentioned brain. So we know that there's this really strong axis between the gut and the brain. One interesting example just out of my world is that, I won't get into this in tons of detail, but we've built this really detailed physiological model over the last 2 years of how the brain stays alive. And it's really taught us to think very differently about Alzheimer's and so forth. And dementia is, as everyone on this call probably knows, drugs have essentially failed. There's this new approved drug that has some modest effects, some big side effects and so forth. But the only thing that's ever worked is lifestyle medicine that's worked at scale. And that's the finger study. There was just an update to that personalized, that made it better. But you get into all these interesting interactions. So to give you an example, one of the natural compounds that seems like it likely has a benefit for dementia would be phosphatidylcholine. People that eat diets rich in phosphatidylcholine get Alzheimer's 3 years later. Our model actually predicts that it becomes rate limiting under hypoxic conditions, which is one of the big triggers we think for dementia and older age. There's a ton of papers on that. And so what's fascinating is that you might then think, okay, I'm going to take phosphatidylcholine or something like that as a means to delay dementia. We think that would have about a 3 to 5 year effect in the models. But if you do that, if in your gut you have certain bacteria, they will eat phosphatidylcholine and they will turn it into trimethylamine, which your liver will turn into TMAO, which is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. So if you don't understand the complexity of those systems, you could try to do something to benefit your brain, also your liver, and instead hurt your heart. And that's a very clear example, I think, of where those things come into play. But it's just the tip of the iceberg of many, many things like this that we see where the interplay really, really matters. And if you don't get into the basics of multiple things at the same time, you can't solve it and you can't really move it forward.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'm looking forward already to take, Jeff's idea on multimodal care, because that's what I've seen happen in group care. But just to go a bit deeper on that, obviously you get to work probably with some functional medicine people around, now in your job now with Thorn Health Tech. Have there been things that you've seen through your modeling now that have sort of I guess put to bed myths or challenged medical, sort of like commonly held beliefs by physicians that that you've now seen in the data that is a more complex complex systems and maybe doesn't have the line of sight to cause as we might think?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's been a number of things that we've done that I think have, pushed on paradigms in a reasonably big way. So Lee Hood and I, of course, worked together for a long time, and we push this notion of scientific wellness, which is really the idea that you should intervene early before there are symptoms, and also build the ability to monitor health in a really deep way and understand the earliest transition states to disease. That was, of course, the reason that we founded Aravale and generated all those data. And we've done kind of a ton of analysis there. We also, I should say, have a book coming out called The Age of Scientific Wellness from Harvard Press, which is available now, will release in a couple months or so, that goes into all this in detail. But so to give a few examples, one that I think is really interesting is that genetics can predict the outcome of lifestyle interventions. So one of the things we did with the Aravale data was to look and see where we could, whether or not people were able to, for example, lower LDL cholesterol through lifestyle intervention, raise HDL cholesterol, things of that nature. And it turned out that some of them could and some of them couldn't. And it was totally predictable by genetics. And one of the things that really matters here is the delta between the genetic prediction of a blood marker and its actual level. If that difference is big, it's pretty easy to move. And if it's not, it's almost impossible to move. It's really hard. And so what that means is that you can provide a genetic map for any person of all the things that are likely to be easy for them to change in their body because their genome will work with them rather than against them. And you can tell them the things that won't. A second example I'll give is we looked at the genetics in asymptomatic people. where, so we're looking at people that have genetic risk for disease, but they don't have the actual disease. And then we used all this multi-omic data to look at what's different between individuals, maybe decades before the onset of symptoms. That's a function of that. And this gets back to your theme of connections, because what we're really saying is that those genetic variants don't do something in isolation. They're connected to everything in your body. So they have to change something that's in your body in order to change the likelihood of you getting that disease. And what that led to was that we identified all these signals out of the blood, hundreds of them, that were associated with genetic risk and presumably give you ideas for prevention or prodromal disease. And I'll just give a couple examples. So one is, if you're looking late stage, like we typically do, case control studies, you have hundreds, maybe thousands of changes. And in there you have cause of disease, you have downstream consequence, and you have compensatory mechanisms, things the body's doing to try to survive, and they're all mixed together.
Yeah.
You look really early, there's very few signals, and they're much more likely to be causal. So for example, if you look at coronary artery disease, of the 400 proteins we tested, only one is highly correlated with genetic risk for coronary artery disease, PCSK9, which of course is the big blockbuster drug that came out of that. Asthma, there's only one. IL-33, there's 4 drug companies currently doing development around that as a target. We can get to the limitations of drugs as single drugs as therapies in a little bit, but what you get is signal that is vastly better, I think, and more enriched than what you see when you look at these late stage case control design, which is of course what we do almost exclusively.
Wow, yeah, it's really, really critical. It's so interesting, and yeah, I mean, I guess give us some great examples there of things that you wouldn't expect. When I saw you, I think the last time we saw each other in person was at the PLMI. That was before the pandemic. I think it was October 2019, and that was the first time that I had come across the concept of network medicine. And obviously, that's interesting in the context of reconnection too, because I think what that's doing is, well, maybe for people who aren't familiar with the book and the concept, my understanding is that it's a subset of systems biology, network medicine. Is that right?
Yeah, I think you could probably argue that it is essentially the application of a part of systems biology to medicine. Yeah.
So, take us through sort of in the context of the year of connection and connection in medicine. What is disconnected in medicine that gets solved by network medicine?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I alluded to some of that via the microbiome that I think is really important, because every single thing that you ingest, whether that be a drug, a supplement, food, no matter what, everything that comes in gets modified by that microbiome. And one of the things we know is that the first estimates are that 13% of drugs are metabolized away by the microbiome. It's probably a similar number for supplements. I don't know why it would argue one way or the other. We know it modifies food. We actually find microbially derived bile acids in the brains of people that have Alzheimer's. We published a paper on that a couple of years ago. So there's all these interconnections. Now, one of the areas that I think is going to be hit strongest by this going forward is what I've mentioned before, which is Alzheimer's disease. So one of the elements, I mentioned this model, which we haven't published yet, but that I'm a big believer in already, is the notion that what has happened in medicine has primarily been a misattribution of compensatory mechanism with cause. So because it wasn't focused on networks, we looked at the dominant pathology, we saw all these amyloid plaques, and concluded that they were the cause of Alzheimer's. This is, of course, under a lot of pressure right now. And there is the new drug that got approved on amyloid, and there was Aduhelm that got approved against the the complaints or the protest of the entire scientific board because it hadn't affected function. But what we did instead from a network medicine perspective was, as I mentioned, build a model of how the brain stays alive. How does it maintain energy? How does it go about its processes of cleaning debris and so forth. And basically, by doing this and starting from the standpoint of health, so starting from scientific wellness, how does it maintain health? Build all the feedback loops. Working with a group called Embody Bio with a good friend of mine, Tom Patterson. And as we did this, what emerged then was a very different picture that lends itself very well to multimodal approaches. Of course, the only thing that's ever worked in Alzheimer's, where you can look at the fundamental aspects of how the brain has to maintain this massive energy load that it has, right? It's 20% of our energy needs, and it's 2% of biomass. Oxygenation goes down as you get older. And as you start doing that, you start to trigger this cascade, which I won't go into a lot of detail right now. But basically, what you end up with is a set of very specific kind of changes that you could make personalized to the individual, where you can actually predict the trajectory. We've done this now for 10 million digital twins, the trajectory over the course of life of at what point it looks likely that these individuals would fall into dementia. This is all based on the model at the moment. So be looking to do some clinical trials to validate this all. But basically, you get a very complete picture that explains a massive amount of data across 30 plus clinical trials and 900 papers, where you can start to tie it all together in one integrated system. And what's beautiful about that in network medicine is that you can't just have a one-off explanation for one piece of data and a one-off explanation for another piece of data. You actually have to synthesize them all at the same time. And it's just radically changed my view of what's going on in that disease. And so, we're getting that out there into the world hopefully pretty soon. But that's the kind of thing I think really has to be done in network medicine. I think you can do it over and over and over again. And it's taking these massive amounts of data, getting early data, so you get this signal that separates cause, consequence, and compensatory mechanism, and then tie that into multimodal personalized approaches, where you use that same AI system that helps you kind of piece all the data together, then makes personalized predictions for every individual. And that's how I really see network medicine coming forward.
That's really a beautiful vision. I'm grateful for you, sharing that. And it's exciting, because I spent a lot of time kind of going to conferences for a minute that were featuring speakers like yourself, and seeing that future of, big data and individualized and otherwise. And then I had a different experience when I went to the Integrated Medicine for the Underserved conference. And that was the first time that I met Jeff. And, it's interesting that one of the P's in P4 medicine, arguably the most important, is participation. And Jeff, maybe that's a good place for us to start, because I think one of the things that I saw when I saw you, first of all, like run a group of providers looking to understand about groups, and then see you to do groups, is that, one of the biggest deficits we have in healthcare and in health is a lack of participation. And yet it underlies this, vision for the future of P4 medicine. And maybe I'd love to just hear your thoughts on what Nathan shared, and particularly what you've come to learn about what it takes to get people to participate in their care.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful. I'm blown away by what you're finding there, Nathan, and what you're putting together, and how you put it together. I'm very much big picture, how do we get people to sleep more, eat more vegetables, exercise more often, right? So I'm sure those will lead to those smaller molecules perhaps being better. It would be great to be able to target. I learned early on that if you want someone's hemoglobin A1C to get better, the last thing you're going to talk about is hemoglobin A1C when people aren't vested, and they're not necessarily, the number doesn't mean anything, right? But what does it mean? Well, maybe you'll live longer and see your grandchild. Maybe you'll urinate less often, and you'll be able to make that trip to New York you want to make, right? So that's how you get at reducing hemoglobin A1C. So I started this nonprofit, the Integrated Center for Group Medical Visits, and we are the main training center for group visits right now. We offer 9 different types of group visits at our clinic, and we started a fellowship so people can come and visit. And we have a website, we have videos, things that people can do to learn how we help people feel connected. But I think it comes to this, To me, feeling included in a group makes you suddenly feel more valuable. And whether that group is just you and your parents, or that group is, a whole bunch of other people who all have diabetes, or this, whatever the group is, feeling that there's someone there who really understands you, right? And could be there for you if you need them. That to me is the magic sauce. I'm not sure what molecule it's doing. I'm sure it's reducing cortisol and, I don't know, making happiness happen. Because my initial research was on loneliness, and it just takes 2 weeks of being in a well facilitated group for people to feel less lonely. Depression takes 3 months, maybe 6, but loneliness can improve right away. And so it's just been I've been very privileged to learn from my patients what I kind of call the empowerment model. So you say, what do you guys think you need to be better? We got a grant recently to start a mental health initiative. So we're going to be doing our mental health, behavioral health services in groups. And I want to do it amazing, right? I want these to be like, kickboxing for anxiety, I don't know, something like amazing. But I'm not going to put that on the population that I'm taking care of, right? I'm going to say, what do you guys want to do? This is your time. And I'm sure it'll be something different and something more amazing than I could have thought of. Taking people from the community. We had a person, she worked with me. We helped her get to become a psychologist. Now she's returning to the community. And those are the kind of stories that give people hope. Like, someday my kids can do that. Someday I can be part of something bigger. I'm not the only one with ADHD that's struggling. What are the best practices? Who will really understand me? And if you reduce loneliness, one of the things, I'm not a high level researcher. I was an electrical engineer, so I know statistics pretty well. But when you get to studying groups, it's very, very complex. But, I was struck initially that, like John Kabat-Zinn's work, which is amazing on mindfulness, it was done in groups. And so now I say to myself, well, was it the mindfulness or was it the group? Is it the fact that people are doing things together when they're doing a trial of a drug, or are they doing it separate and maybe not getting better? And so just as it sounds like you're starting to think like, how do we put all these things together, Nathan? And, I'm also thinking like, how do you put all these pieces together that would make someone feel included in a group so that they feel special, important, invested enough to say, hey, I am going to buy broccoli with what little money I have, because it's going to allow me to spend more time with these people. I'll be a good role model for someone else. It'll support someone else in the community.
It's really interesting. Yeah, and Jeff, obviously, I'm involved every day trying to facilitate, group care at scale as well, because I've been profoundly affected by your vision. But one of the things that you might find interesting, Nathan, is because we've been doing everything virtually, we've been able to actually create structures where people can talk to each other in the group during the session like this in Zoom, but also in between the sessions. And what we're starting to see now is starting to look at really group bioinformatics, I guess, one way or another. Like how many, if someone has more connections to more people in the group and they message more people, do they get better more quickly? And how can we set people up for success by introducing them to each other? I want to play you guys a clip. It's just 5 minutes. It's from an interview that I did this week. It's actually out on the podcast this week. It's with Dr. Zach Bush. And we sort of bridged your two worlds, interestingly, and I'd love to share it with you and then get your feedback on it. So let's just watch this. And by the way, keep the questions coming in on Twitter. We'll have a bit of time here, but this is 5 minutes from Dr. Zach Bush. If you haven't listened to it or watched it, you can check it out on the Evolution of Medicine podcast. I think the health coach is a very interesting sort of exponential person in the ecosystem, because what that person is in general, in my experience, is someone that has gone through that sort of dark to light process. Like they've woken up, they're doing some other job, they get chronically ill, they find a way back, they turn on, typically earlier than the end of life, but they're like light again. They understand that healing is possible and they've done it. And they want to be part of something that facilitates health in others. And I think with this group model, we've uncovered that a group model run by coaches, one of the things that's been missing from the sort of classic functional medicine experience is that you never meet someone else who's reversed their chronic illness, right? The doctor may or may not have. That may be the reason why they've come across, but if we have to wait for everyone to get chronically ill and have their aha moment, it's going to be too late. One of the things that we've seen in this sort of team-based care model is like, who do you have on your clinical team who, one, can inspire patients to say, look, I did it and you can do it. And this is like, I'm going to share my own apology for the way that I didn't take care of myself and I had to sort of change my personality and change who I was in order to heal, and you can do it too. But then to see other people, doing it who are just like you. And I think there's something really powerful in that, because if you can take one person's experience and possibly multiply that by 20 in a group, or 400 20 groups at a time by one coach, now you have something that can be exponential in nature, and one light can turn on another light. And I feel like that's the potential of what I've witnessed in the last 2 years, is that there is an exponential mechanism for one person to share another person's light. And in the context of like a functional medicine practice or a medical practice, it can actually be like harnessed in a way that is capable of an exponential shift.
It's beautiful. We've gotten to see that happen under a microscope in our lab, over and over again for the last 10 years as we've studied the communication network of the microbiome. So this is basically the wireless communication between cells. So that's called redox chemistry. And bacteria and fungi, each in their own species, makes about 10 or 15 of these variants of carbon molecules that can carry electrons. And so they basically form in liquid state a liquid circuit board where information can travel very rapidly from cell to cell. And so we've been the first lab to get to witness, in the world, what happens to human cells when you put them in the bath of a microbial communication network, which is obviously where the first single-celled organism turned into a multicellular organism in the stew of this communication network. And so it's really been a humbling and awe-inspiring journey to see what happens when the communication network of nature is put in contact with human cells. And this has never been seen before in laboratories, because in every single petri dish ever studying cancer, autoimmune disease, vascular disease, whatever model, every single one of those was done in a sterile petri dish. And so we only understand human biology in a complete disconnect from nature. And therefore we don't believe in healing. Therefore we don't believe in miraculous recovery, because we've never seen it before, because we were studying human cells in isolation. And so our very scientific model towards which we try to understand human health is so fundamentally flawed in our current understanding of how biology happens, that every conclusion that's ever been made in a peer-reviewed journal article is a half-truth at best. And so we have to remember that we have misunderstood the human life potential because we believed it to be an isolated event. As we reconnect humans to this communication network of nature, the very first thing that happens is that the cells, getting the wireless communication network, immediately hardwire with fiber optic cables called gap junctions. And thousands of these little cables go from cell to cell. And this whole gap junction that may contain 1,000 little tiny hollow cables within it is, 100 times smaller than a human hair. And so it's this tiny, tiny bundle of cables. But at the end of every single one of those hollow tubes that's now 1,000 times, smaller than a human hair, there's a perfect light aperture that can open and close, letting more or less light from one cell to the next. And so what you just said was you saw one person sharing light with another. That's literally what happens at the cellular level. Is as soon as there's communication, they immediately set up fiber optic cables to share light between cells. And there's something really beautiful at that microscopic level to understand that the microbiome allowed for multicellular life to occur through its capacity to connect cells by wireless communication that then inspires a hardwired sharing of light. And for that light transfer, we managed to make the first nematodes and earthworms and humans, because of our capacity to share light. And so your community connection is basically the macro expression of how biology occurs.
Yeah, your psychologist that's coming back into the community, right, to now run these groups. It sort of that gave me a sort of a chill when I heard him say that, because I understand that that's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, our massage therapist, we trained her. She now does massage for people in our community. All of our staff, we've been together for over 15 years because we like each other. We like the work we're doing. A strong shout out to coaches. A lot of places aren't able to, they'll say, afford coaches. But we've moved. Just one of the innovations we're doing with groups that it might be helpful for people to hear about is that we've moved into direct contracting and value-based care. And wouldn't you know that, as Nathan pointed out, loneliness may be one of the biggest predictors of poor health. Well, it is, so when we make our patients less lonely, when we provide them services they otherwise can't afford, like acupuncture and massage, they use the emergency room less often. They use fewer medications. And so we're in a value-based contract. We do have risk. I guess we could lose, but we're winning. We're doing very well. And that allows us to uncouple the idea that the doctor needs to be the one providing the everything, so that there can be a billing encounter. I just wanted to say that because that's a big innovation that we're very proud of at our center. But yeah, I'm not surprised that on the microscopic level and on the big level, I can't wait to find out when it is, because we can sense it. Me and Marisol and Crystal and Jennifer and all of us who've been doing these groups for years, we'll go, oh, this group's not going well. Oh, this group is. Okay, now this group is. They're all caring about each other, even if they have different opinions and things. And I can't tell you what it is. Is it an odor? Are we smelling a pheromone? Is it, we hear the tone of their voice is something different? Is there, what was that molecule, Nathan? Is there prolactin increased? I have no idea. What are we sensing? But we can tell, and so, when you're able to do value-based care, you can do just good medicine. And that probably includes all of these things, including doing testing for maybe these small, unique things to people that could ultimately prevent a lifetime of disability. So, very exciting. A lot of reactions to that.
If it's anything like the microbiome, it might be a smell because it could be quorum sensing, right? A little bit of that. So that actually came up on that podcast too. I think we were just talking about that. Nathan, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you heard from Zach and sort of like, I know you spent a lot of time looking at the microbiome and understanding how it works and the complexity behind it. Did that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think it's there's a lot to unpack. I think that there's no doubt that we can learn a lot from each other and that patients can learn a lot from each other of, the others that are going through the similar experiences with them. And, as we do peer-reviewed studies and, the case control design studies and all these kind of things, you typically are isolating, right, a single variable and you're trying to see, does it, is there an effect, right? Do you get a p-value? Do you see it? Is there something there? All right, and that's very valuable. But in your own life, and as you're going through, there's probably a bunch of different things that you have to do to get yourself to optimal health, right? There's probably a whole bunch of little of problems. And I think it's that complexity, and this is where I think functional medicine comes in really nicely, because you have to kind of figure out within the context of your life, your lifestyle, your problems, your history, and so forth, how to pull together all these disparate aspects to make as big a difference as possible in your own health. And that part of the journey, I feel like, is really augmented by having other people that are going through the similar experiences who can share. I'll share a trivial example from my own life. Terrible seasonal allergies for 20 years, just couldn't really go out hiking outside or enjoy it much. I'd go outside. I was at a conference. I remember it was spring and I'm just like crying like massively because I just can't be outside with these like terrible allergies, and kind of hoping that, maybe the Maybe the drug industry will come up with, like the first time I took Sudafed was amazing. The second time was okay. The third time it didn't work anymore and it was kind of over. And anyway, I was sharing these experiences, going through, learning more, in the wellness space, and did very different things, which was, that won't be surprising to people here, but I went to 0 processed sugar, and I went to plant-based, and I did a little bit of, I don't know if it mattered, but a little bit of local honey, which they took. Anyway, I did a bunch of these different things, and I did them for different reasons. I didn't actually do them for allergies. And then to my great shock, as it came around in the spring, I walked outside and it was fine. No problem. No, I explained this to some of the people on the NIH study section I chaired. They're like, well, if it wasn't you, I'd be very skeptical of this. But I'm like, I don't know what to tell you, but they are gone. And it was pretty amazing. And that probably, had to do with just being in too high of a baseline inflammatory state, and basically things like that. So that's a trivial example. People have serious problems in the world. But I still think it's an example of, sometimes if you change certain things in your lifestyle, the functional medicine doctors that I went to at Vita in Seattle, which I just love, that did a great job with me, figuring out that, the problem I thought I had was actually something in a related area. And this got into a lot of physical fitness kind of things, physical therapy of, some pain I was having, and you find out it's, your knees hurt, but they don't hurt because of your knees. They hurt because, your IT band is too tight, and you've trained yourself to use only your thighs and not your buttocks for some weird reason that, or whatever. And so, anyway, that's a little bit rambling, but I think the idea is just that these things are so interconnected. Everyone's on a personal journey. And so if you're with other individuals that are going through that same kind of personal journey, there's just no doubt that you are able to help you piece together what works for you in your life.
It's so true, Jeff. I mean, what I'd love to, one of the things that I saw you do that it takes a while for other doctors to click when I talk about it, is that often not having, like Nathan is obviously a world-class expert in what he does. And functional medicine people gain an insane amount of expertise through all of the extra education that they didn't even have to take, that they just took because they felt like it was the right thing to do. And yet, when it comes to your work, what I recognize that you were having to almost not be the expert. It was actually, you had to, like you said, not say, hey, look, the best thing for anxiety is kickboxing, and we're all doing it. There's a certain amount of humility in your model to be like, I don't really know what these people, what will get them activated into wanting to participate in their health. So I'm going to listen and find out. And I think that there's a certain discomfort for experts to sit in the not knowing, because you've been, known forever. So what would you, obviously you've helped a lot of doctors sort of, come in your direction who have felt called to the work that you've done. And obviously a lot of doctors are called to kind of the work that Nathan's doing too, to go further than that. And I guess what I'd love to just spend the last, 15 minutes of this talking about, and maybe start with Jeff, is how do we bridge these two worlds, right? Because clearly there's some incredible expertise on systems biology that's needed to get to these individual solutions. But also clearly, there's a level of participation by the greater community that's needed, a baseline of participation in order to, involve yourself in anything new. And it's very difficult for one doctor to straddle both of those, to, scratch the itch of, individualized care and scratch the itch of, of creating massive participation. Someone like Shilpa Saxena is probably a, unicorn in that way. So she's like going to both worlds simultaneously. How do we get the best of those two worlds together to create this evolution of medicine and scale it up so that, even the disempowered can participate?
Well, we actually have a functional medicine group that people come to every Wednesday, and it's free. We have a grant for that from Fullscripts, if I'm allowed to put a shout out. I noticed they support you as well.
They're a sponsor, actually, yeah.
Yeah. And for instance, last Wednesday, we spent 12 weeks talking about chocolate. So when you bring people together and you say, okay, we're going to talk about functional medicine, the first thing they wanted to do was lose weight. Then we started talking about cravings, and then somehow we brought up chocolate. We hire a functional medicine dietitian. She knows a lot more than I do about functional medicine. I consider myself much higher than the average doctor, much lower than Nathan or what have you, right? So I'm somewhere in the middle. Um, and we talk about chocolate and how to eat the chocolate and maybe dark chocolate. And then this week in Consumer Reports, one of my patients comes in and says, "Did you know dark chocolate has a lot of arsenic and lead in it?" And I'm like, I didn't. Oh my, okay. Well, it's not like I told them to eat chocolate. Like we all sat there together, really thinking this could be a good thing. Then the community brought to me something that I'm still not sure how to interpret it. Like, are people absorbing these metals? Is it, just because it's in there doesn't mean you're getting it. Does the benefit outweigh the risk? But we in real time have a community now which is empowered to make their own decisions about their health, right? And I'll always say there aren't good doctors, there are only good patients. But then I have to say, and there aren't good patients, there are only good communities, right? Because I can't turn to my patient and say, you need to eat more pomegranates, and they're going to go buy them because they can't. They don't exist in our community. I don't even know if they're healthy, so excuse me if they're not. But the thing that keeps me humble is that we're constantly learning new things as a medical community. Beta blockers were good and they were bad. Now they're good sometimes. Now they're bad sometimes, right? Cholesterol medicines, okay, they're good for everyone. Okay, they're not good for everyone. Okay, turns out there's a gene maybe we need to look for, right? And so I think if nothing else, we have to be humble because otherwise our credibility is shot. Our patients are going to come and say, "Oh, he said dark chocolate's good. He's wrong." Instead it's like, well, we talked about it a lot together and I feel comfortable telling him, look what I found out. Sitting on your hands, getting the introverts to talk, making sure the extroverts don't mob the scene, breaking into small groups, really getting out, what does the community need? So when we started a massage group, it wasn't my idea, it was the community's idea. We'd like massages. Okay, well, let's train this person to do them. Okay, now you guys get free massages while she's learning. Okay, now she wants to charge something. Okay, I'll create a billing model where we can do it. But you guys have to come, right? So it wasn't just me making these groups, it's the whole community. And I encourage people to come visit. The Wild Foundation gave us some seed money to start a mini fellowship where people can come and spend even just a half day watching people come and go and the facilitation and what the receptionist does, what the facilitator does, what people get. It changes your mind. It makes you go, oh, okay, I was going to do an educational program. By the way, educational programs are phenomenal if you're dealing with empowered people. Like I would love an educational program. I would love to hear what are the 8 things you need to do. But the patients I take care of aren't empowered. We need to build relationships for life, not an 8-week program, a long program that people can opt out and opt in of. I'm grandstanding a little bit, sorry. But
I'd love to that actually brings in a good point, of what we've spoken about here. So you mentioned, being in risk contracts. And, when I speak to people who are interested in that, we talk about longitudinal care, right? Because ultimately, what is stickier than friendship, right? Friendship is like the stickiest thing that you can have for people to show up. And Nathan, I know, in all the work that you've been involved with, some of that work has been involved with like seeing how things change over time. And I'd love to just, get your thoughts on, a lot of times I think we think about the kind of care that we're delivering. We're going to reverse someone's chronic illness in 6 months, and that's a reasonable amount of time to change the underlying physiology, get people into new behaviors, do a regime that normalizes the numbers. What can you tell us about what happens to people after they engage in these interventions? And if we're going to meld these two worlds of sort of precision medicine and participation medicine into a future medicine, how do we keep people engaged in the medium term or long term?
Yeah, and it's a great question, and it really comes back to what we've been really interested in, at the heart of the scientific wellness that Lee and I have been advocating for. But basically, it is really about you have to make a big impact in their health today, and then via the kind of things that you can, the measurements and so forth, you have to take something that's really abstract in the far future and make it concrete and relevant now. So, because, that notion of if you eat this cake or whatever, you're increasing your odds of getting, some disease downstream, right? If you do that as a prolonged behavior, right? You're consuming too much sugar, you're consuming, too many calories, whatever it is. The immediacy of that in the moment isn't very high. But if you can kind of make it obvious to people what's happening in their bodies right now, and you can see a picture of it, and you can see those changes, I think that makes a difference. For behavior change, obviously the biggest factor is the social component, right? Is it connecting with something that they care about, someone that they love, those kind of things. So one of the elements, though, that I do want to come back to, and this was actually one of the big reasons that I ended up taking the job at Thorne, was that, you mentioned, like, how do we get this, from the realm of science, like, into a person's life? And one of the elements of that is that there's so much complexity when you really get into it. And I've been pretty blown away by as much as we've learned from these data clouds as we got into it. A lot of people, when we started, said it was a waste of time because these are well people, so there's nothing to learn. And 25 some odd papers later, there's a ton you can learn. But basically, what we have to do is to be able to take all that complexity, and we have to be able to deal with that both in the sense of algorithms and AIs that are helpful to us, and in the mind of the practitioner who can help to deliver that to individuals, because we have to make the actions simple. And I can't remember exactly the quote. There's an Oliver Wendell Holmes quote that says something along the lines of, I wouldn't give 2 figs for simplicity on this side of complexity, but give me simplicity on the other side of complexity, and for that I'll give you everything I have, something like that. And I think that's really what we're going for, which is to be able to deliver simple, important insights, both with practitioners and to patients, such that you're taking into account all of this complexity and all of the stuff that's going on in such a way that you give people the ability to navigate health in their life and to navigate around disease, not even get into that type of situation. And I think that's the future that's coming. And I think that we're going to get there, in the not so distant future, and you can see it already happening now. So I think that's incredibly exciting. And James, thanks for pulling this together as well, because I do think you do have to bridge it does take that really deep molecular knowledge of what's happening in the body, and it takes the social connections and the delivery and the behavior change and all the other aspects. And if you don't go across that continuum, you basically never get there.
Actually, we got a question that came in, and I'll put this to Jeff because that's a great point, Nathan. It's like, how do you with a disempowered population, Jeff, what have been the best ways that you've found to educate people about their own physiology?
So patience, it takes a while. You have to provide value, right? So if you're in a real underserved community where they have very little resources, they have very little free time, you have to have a program that's valuable enough to make them come. So giving someone acupuncture, an exercise class, food and nutrition, those are things that bring people in. And then after 3 weeks, 6 weeks of spending time with each other, if it's a weekly group, then people are there for the community. But to get something started, you need to have some good incentives. Really get everyone involved in talking. Who are you? Why are you here? Anyone else feel that way? Making connections for people. Those are some of the skills we teach facilitation. And if you go to our website, I put the address of the website and a YouTube link. You can find out more. But some people are naturally good at this, James, quite frankly, but other people need training in how to facilitate. But it takes time.
I'd like to share one model with you guys that I wrote about in my book, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it. So this was a doctor in Colorado called Dr. Christopher Moat. And what he ended up doing was essentially a group functional lab consult. So his model was if there's 10 people this week that he was planning to do this, like, gut test on, I think like a Genova panel, get those people, together, and in an hour, take the 10 of them. Each person walks into that meeting with their own unique data stream or their own report. He then essentially spends the time sharing, like, what is this report? What do these numbers mean? Everyone is looking at their own individual one and getting their own sort of information from it. But then the questions that are asked through that session, his view was,
Nathan, do you hear James?
No, I think it froze up. I think we lost him.
What I think James was building to was a model where the value comes from these functional medicine tests and tools. And I like that idea. I probably wouldn't do it the very first visit. I'd probably save it like, hey, this is what it is. Who are you? Why are you here? Let's build some community. Do you want to know your numbers? And then when the group says yes, that's when you bring them in. But sometimes these things are expensive. I think James has left. Hopefully he rejoins us. But I think the cost of things initially is always expensive, right? I remember it was hard for me to get a C-reactive protein on patients to know their inflammation because they'd say, oh, you can get an ESR, same information. It's like, well, kind of, not really. So, I don't know how much it would cost to run a panel like that. Do you have any ideas?
Yeah, I don't know that exact panel, but I want to, address, I think the question is really important though, right? Which is, how do we help these less empowered communities really take advantage of all of this? Because there is a level at which you can, there's first movers and they're paying pretty high prices to be able to measure everything. One of the elements of that, of course, is just how much cheaper we can make these kind of technologies. So, the genome, of course, very famously came down like 1 million-fold in cost. We're trying to do that in other spaces. Metabolomics is starting to get quite a bit cheaper. And some of this is really how we deliver care too, because if you look at a single gene test in medicine, they often charge more than it costs to sequence an entire genome. So, as we go to some of these omics technologies, or, you can make thousands of measurements out of the blood, that's getting cheaper, certainly on the metabolomics side in particular. Proteomics is coming down slowly, but we're making some progress there. RNAs you can generate very cheaply. And so I actually think that a lot of the future in medicine, we had, the examples, and there's, of course, all the documentaries and so forth about Theranos trying to take traditional type lab tests and miniaturize them, and all the issues that had its own issues as well. But these omics tests are by their nature already miniaturized. You never do them on large samples, and you get a huge amount of information out of them. So as we start being able to harness that, validate these more, get lab developed tests, get the approvals through the FDA and so forth, the ability that we're going to have, I think, going forward to get an incredible density of information at prices that are, I think, quite a bit cheaper than a lot of medical tests today. I think that future is coming, and it's a future that we can choose to have. It's going to depend partly on the regulatory structures and how we adopt changes, but the level of information I think that we'll be able to start getting, and with really harnessing technological advance to lower that, and then AI, which I keep coming back to because I'm sort of obsessed with it these days.
But it's incredible what they're finding. Yeah,
is incredible. And so, if you listen to that, the CEO of OpenAI, for example, so if the cost of applying intelligence goes to zero, then there's a whole other thing about energy cost dropping if fusion works out and so forth. Now you can start to apply that to these large data sets in biology. That, I really think it sets us up for the century of biology and medicine, where we just transform at a rate that is almost unthinkable prior to this. And so I'm really excited about. and nervous about.
Yeah, I would love it. Oh, James is back. Great.
I'm back.
I would love it if you could do a test that says, oh, they are lonely because this is high, and they are stressed because that is high. And I've gotten quite good at identifying people who are lonely. I know what questions to ask, but I think that's an area where a lot of people strike out. You know, a lot of providers say, oh, this person seems happy. They've got lots of friends. It would be great if there was an easier way sometimes to test at those things too. So,
Yeah,
Yeah,
we've
and
been actually thinking about a belonging index actually to try and see, because there are questions from like the PHQ-9 and Promise 29 that sort of start that question. And then one of the first things that we've been doing in our groups is to have people like identify, take some moments and say, who in your community is going to be supportive of you making these changes? And some people can come up with 10 straight away, and some people struggle to write down the first name. So as we can try and get that data, you know, to be virtual and inside the system and get people to participate, I'm hoping that we can start to, you know, go out to a whole population and identify, okay, who are the 20% of most lonely people, because those people should definitely be in a group, if not everyone.
yeah.
Anyway, guys, yeah, sorry, Jeff, carry on.
Oh, are we? Have we reached 9 o'clock? Is this our
Yeah,
time?
we have. I wanted to,
Okay.
thank you so much for your participation. Nathan, thank you for making your debut here on the Functional Forum. And Jeff, you know, thank you for being back. I'm super excited about this year of connection. You know, we have a lot of interesting, you know, content coming up. Exciting time to be in medicine, man, especially if you're in our world, right? Where we're in the world of salutogenesis and helping people actually get healthy. I think, you know, we're in a moment where people are looking for us. People want to know what we know. That was something that Jeff Bland said a few years ago that really resonated with me, is that, and now more than ever, and I'm seeing it at the health system level, at the payer level, at the ACO level, people want to know what we know. So wherever you are, wherever you're listening, go out and share the message. Thank you guys for being great messengers and incredible experts in your own areas. And thank you for your participation and contribution to this year's